You know, when we talk about the firearms carried by American presidents, it's about so much more than just, well, guns. They're these fascinating windows into the person, the office, and frankly, the dangers of the time. From a symbol of command on a battlefield to a secret weapon for self-defense, the story of the president's gun is really the story of America itself.
So what exactly can a gun tell us about a president? Well, as we're about to see, they've been everything from technological game changers and symbols of honor to priceless artifacts and even tools of modern self-defense. Let's dive right in. All right, let's kick things off with two presidents who were also legendary generals. For these guys, a firearm wasn't just some object. It was a tool that was directly tied to command, to innovation, and frankly, to survival. Okay, picture this. It's 1863. The absolute height of the Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln is completely fed up with his ordnance chief, who keeps dismissing new technology. So what does he do? He invites an inventor to the White House, and then they walk right out to what is now the National Mall for some target practice. This is the actual result. I mean, this wasn't some casual afternoon plinking session. This was a direct presidential intervention, a test of a weapon he thought could literally change the entire course of the war. And this right here shows you the massive technological leap that Lincoln was so excited about. The standard issue rifle, the muzzle-loader, could get off maybe 3 shots a minute if you were really, really good. But the Spencer repeating rifle, we're talking 15, maybe 20 shots a minute. That's not just an improvement, folks. That is a revolution on the battlefield. Lincoln saw that potential instantly, and right after his personal field test, he endorsed it, he bypassed all the bureaucracy, and orders for that rifle just exploded. Now, let's jump forward about 80 years for a totally different story. During World War II, Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower had access to the legendary M1911 pistol, right? The powerful official sidearm for American soldiers. But that's not what he carried. Nope. He secretly carried this tiny Colt detective special, a little snub-nosed revolver made for undercover cops. He even rigged up a homemade clip for it from a mess kit. His own staff had no idea he was carrying it. So while Lincoln used a rifle to shape the battlefield, Eisenhower carried a hidden pistol to protect the commander himself. For other presidents, a firearm was less about military strategy and much more about being an extension of their personal code. It was a symbol of honor in a time when a man's reputation was, well, everything. This word right here, poltroon, it's an old-fashioned way of calling someone an utter coward. And in 1806, a man named Charles Dickinson used this word in the press to describe a future president, Andrew Jackson. For a guy like Jackson, a man of just fierce, unbelievable pride, an insult like that could only be answered one way, with pistols at dawn. So at the duel, Jackson makes this calculated and incredibly risky move. He lets Dickinson, who was a known marksman, shoot first. The shot hits Jackson right in the chest, but get this, instead of falling, he just stands there. He stands firm, takes his time, aims carefully, and kills Dickinson. That bullet in his chest was so close to his heart that it could never be removed. He carried it for the rest of his life. I mean, wow. Nothing illustrates Jackson's iron will and the brutal honor code of his time better than that story. Decades later, a different kind of honor was embodied by another president, the honor of the great adventurer. When you think of Theodore Roosevelt, you almost have to think of his Winchester 1895 rifle. You can't really picture one without the other, right? When he wrote about his African safari, he called his powerful .405 Winchester his, quote, medicine gun for lions. It wasn't just for hunting. It was a symbol of his whole rugged, larger-than-life persona. You know, every so often, an object story gets so big that it completely transforms. It stops being just a tool and becomes this priceless piece of national history. So get a load of this number, almost $2 million. That's the price George Washington's flintlock pistols sold for at an auction back in 2002. And these weren't just any old pistols. They were a gift from his close friend and trusted ally, the Marquis de Lafayette. Washington carried these through the Revolutionary War. They are literally forged into the story of America's founding. And hey, if you thought that was a lot of money, well, hold onto your hat. Just 20 years later, in 2022, Ulysses S. Grant's gorgeous ivory-handled revolvers sold for over $5 million. At this point, these things are way more than just guns. They're artifacts that carry the legacy of the men who shaped the nation. And their value, well, it clearly reflects that immense history. Okay, let's bring this whole conversation into our time. How does a president's relationship with firearms look today in a very different social and political world?
So, sources say that before he was president, Donald Trump held a concealed carry permit right in New York City. Now, if you know anything about New York, you know that's not an easy thing to get. He reportedly owned 2 handguns, a big .45 caliber Heckler & Koch USB, kind of what you might call a nightstand gun, and a smaller Smith & Wesson .642 revolver, a weapon designed specifically to be concealed, very popular with off-duty cops.
And when he was asked why he had it, his logic, reported back in a 2016 interview, was pretty straightforward. If nobody has guns, then only the bad guys have them. This really reflects a modern argument for gun ownership, one that's centered on personal protection in a regular civilian context, a really different perspective from the military and frontier worlds of those earlier presidents.
So what's the takeaway here? As we've seen, these objects made of steel and wood are so much more than just machines. They really do serve as this unique window into the men who owned them.
I mean, think about it. For Lincoln, the gun was a tool of war and innovation, a way to win. For Jackson and Roosevelt, it was a symbol of their unbending personal honor. For Washington and Grant, their pistols have become priceless artifacts, connecting us directly to the past. And then for a modern president like Trump, the firearm is framed as a personal right, a tool for self-defense in a civilian world.
Each one tells a totally different story about the person and their times. And that really leaves us with a final question, doesn't it? 100 years from now, when historians are looking back at our era, what personal objects are they going to study to understand the character and the challenges of today's leaders? What will be their medicine gun?